Congratulations! You have officially made it to the last method of solving a quadratic equation, and that's using the quadratic formula. This method can be used to solve any quadratic, but it can be a little tedious because of all of the substitution and order of operations that we need to remember. Quick review from our last lesson. In order to use the quadratic formula, your quadratic needs to be in standard form, which means everything needs to be on the left and 0 is on the right. We always start by figuring out what our discriminant is, b squared minus 4ac, because that tells us how many solutions we should end up looking for. And if we end up with 0 solutions, we can stop. All right, so let's get down to using the quadratic formula. My quadratic is in standard form. Everything is on the left with 0 on the right. So I'm going to identify A, B, and C. A equals 2, B equals negative 3, and C equals negative 5. Before I do the quadratic formula, you have to write it down. So I'm writing down the quadratic formula. 1, it'll make it more likely that I'll remember what it is. And 2, it helps make sure that I take care of substituting everything in correctly. So once you've written the quadratic formula, we're going to focus just on the discriminant. B squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to take negative 3 in parentheses to square it, and then I'm going to subtract 4 times a times c. So I pull up my calculator. You're going to string this in exactly as you see it. Okay, so we are going to plug in negative 3 in parentheses. We're going to square it. Minus 4 times 2 times negative 5, and we get a discriminant of 49. All right, so now we're going to replace everything in the quadratic formula with what their letters are. So I've got x equals negative b, and b is negative 3, so make sure you put that in parentheses. Then I've got plus or minus the square root, and instead of writing b squared minus 4ac, we've already found the discriminant. We can just put 49 in there. And it all gets divided by 2 times 2. So then take a minute and simplify each individual set of items in this quadratic formula. It'll make your life a lot easier. I do not recommend stringing this whole thing into the calculator. So negative 3 makes positive 3. And right here, I've got plus and minus. And the square root of 49 is 7. And that plus and minus takes care of the negative and positive versions. And then 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 3 is 12. Okay, so in every other method that we've done, I said as soon as we take the square root, we split it into 2 equations, which now we're going to do it. So I've got 3 plus 7 divided by 12. And then I've also got, and that equals x, and then I've also got 3 minus 7 divided by 12. Okay, and that split comes from right here. So I'm going to simplify the top. 3 plus 7 is 10. So I've got 10 divided by 12 equals x. And then I've got negative 4 divided by 12 equals x. And it's kind of important that you end up simplifying your fractions, so I'm going to show you how to do that. You're going to do 10 division 12, and you're going to hit math, that math key right there. And up here, it says frac. That's going to take your division problem that you just put in there, and it's going to turn it into its reduced form fraction. So, 10 divided by 12, frac, enter, 5 over 6 equals x. I'm going to do it again with the negative 4 over 12. Negative 4 division 12, math, frac, enter. I've got negative 1/3 equals x. So here are my two solutions, also known as the x-intercepts. Okay, in example number 2, the only thing that's different is the function notation. Remember that f parentheses x stands for f of x, and that's just the name of the function. Okay, so we're still going to make sure that our quadratic is standard form, and is in standard form, and I've got that, x squared minus 6x plus 10. So we also have to have it set equal to 0. So I'm going to take f of x and set it equal to 0. So I've got 0 equals x squared minus 6x plus 10. So I'm going to identify a, b, and c. A equals 1, b is negative 6, and c is 10. And I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to identify the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. So I've got negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10. And I go to my calculator, and I plug it in. Exactly as you wrote it, as long as you put those numbers in parentheses. And I end up with negative 4. Oh, wait a minute. That's a negative number. I can stop solving this quadratic equation. There are no real solutions. And that is the answer to your math problem. And we can move on to example number 3. So, our first step in example number 3 is to make sure that our quadratic is in standard form. And right now it's not. Now this is one extra part about standard form that we haven't really spent time talking about. We want a to be bigger than 0. So I could move x squared over, and I could move negative 4 over, but then that would make my a value negative 1. So instead of doing that, I'm going to take 2x and move that over to the right side of the equation. Cancels out, and I end up with 0 equals. Now I want this to look like ax squared plus bx plus c. So I'm going to write my x squared down first, and then I'm going to slide that negative 2x right in between x squared and minus 4. My a value is 1, my b value is negative 2, and my c value is negative 4. And I'm going to solve this using the quadratic formula, so I better write it down. Negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? And I'm going to come over here to the right side of my page, and I'm going to write just the discriminant down so I can evaluate and figure out how many solutions I have. B gets replaced with negative 2, A gets replaced with 1, and C gets replaced with negative 4. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it right into my calculator. -2 in parentheses squared. And I end up with 20. Okay, so my discriminant is positive, and I know that I'm going to have 2 solutions. So I'm going to come back over to my quadratic formula, and I'm going to replace everything that I know. So I know that B is -2. Don't forget that negative in front, because that negative is part of the formula. Plus and minus the square root of 20 all over 2 times 1. And so I'm going to come over to my calculator, and I'm going to see what the square root of 20 is. That's an irrational number, so I'm just going to leave it as the square root of 20. And right here, I'm going to split my quadratic up into 2 pieces. A negative makes a positive 2. Plus the square root of 20 divided by 2. So x equals 2 plus the square root of 20 divided by 2. And x equals 2 minus the square root of 20 divided by 2. And you are not required to simplify them. So here are your final solutions. All right, I know it looks complicated and scary, but it wasn't really that difficult to put it there, was it? All right, so that's using the quadratic formula. Try and do a couple of problems on your own. Complete the your turns, and then make sure to have them checked before moving on.